question 7. Looking back at your preliminary task, what do you feel you have learnt in progression from it to your final production? At the beginning of our coursework, we conducted a preliminary task in order for us to decide which route we were going to take with our coursework. Here is my prelim magazine cover and contents page. And here is the final magazine I produced. As you can see, even from initially looking at my prelim in comparison to my final magazine, there is a huge difference in terms of the way it looks. When I began to construct my prelim magazine, I hardly conducted any research and planning into similar products. Here you can see I've only conducted one piece of research before making my prelim magazine. Even then, my research is into fashion magazines, and as I created a college magazine, these are not from a similar market, so I conducted my research into the wrong market. However, for my music magazine, I conducted a lot of research into similar products. Next you can see a zoomed out prezi which I conducted where I analysed 2 music magazines of similar genres of my music magazine. I learnt a lot from this, including how a music magazine of that genre should look. This really helped me to get an idea of what my final magazine should look like. Next I conducted primary and secondary research in order to know the magazine's target audience as well as what people who fit into that audience group thought. I then went on to produce many other blog posts while doing my research and planning for my magazine. Here are some of them: research into institutions, photography skills and development, flat plans, research into costume props and makeup, research into font, recce of location hazard assessments, shot lists, article planning, pause distance, planning dates for construction. Here you can see I have conducted up to 3 times the amount of research in comparison to my prelim. This is because my skills had developed more, so I knew what type of research I had to conduct. This is why my research was more focused into the correct area compared to the prelim, where my research was into the wrong institution. The reason why my research and planning had now developed and was better was because I was now comfortable using websites like ipcmedia.com and dafont.com, as well as using the professional cameras and other software on the Macs. I was now able to use a wider variety of hardware and software. My research and planning was more developed and focused into a certain area. This impacted my work as I now knew how to produce work more in line with professional practice, as I now had a more detailed understanding of the forms and conventions of real media products. This also meant that my magazine would reflect the conventions as my magazine was of a similar genre. Overall, due to my more in-depth research and planning, my final products appeared more professional and on par with those already on the market. Due to my planning, I found my time management better whilst I was creating my product, and due to my new knowledge of the research, my products appeared more aesthetically pleasing to its audience. Next you can see the progression from my prelim to my final magazine through the construction stages. I created both my prelim magazine and my final magazine on Photoshop and InDesign. However, when I was constructing my prelim magazine, I had only been using Photoshop for a few days, where for my final magazine I'd been using it for a few months, so my skills had developed more. With both of these softwares I knew what certain tools did. My skills had developed from doing simple tasks throughout my research in these programs. I also spent some of my own time using Photoshop, especially to ensure I knew how to use all the tools correctly. Because I did a lot of practice with the software before making my final magazine, I knew what I was doing on the programs, and due to my other research, I knew what was expected of me in terms of the conventions of the magazine I had to create. This is why my final magazine looks much more professional in comparison to my prelim. Next I will compare my QE Weekly magazine to my Sound Music magazine in terms of construction. This includes the images of them, the page layout, the fonts, the models, and the appropriate mise-en-scène, as well as the content of the magazine. As you can see, the highlighted masthead on Sound looks better than the one on QE Weekly. This is because I researched into fonts and downloaded a font especially for my masthead, where on QE Weekly I used one which was already available. I also played around with strokes in order for the masthead to create its own identity and fit in with the page of the magazine. Also on Sound, you can see I have stuck to the 3-colour scheme, where on QE Weekly I haven't. I learnt this in my research that I should only really stick to 3 colours in order for it to stop looking overcrowded, so I carried this through from my research to my construction. On QE Weekly, you can see I have used a range of different fonts and colours for the cell lines. It looks kind of messy and unarranged, where on Sound I have used the same font for all my cell lines and learned how to add in strokes, spaces between letters and breaks between each cell line in order for it to look like a professional magazine. I also added in more cell lines on Sound than I did on QE Weekly, that were simple to avoid overcrowding. For my main image on QE Weekly, it was a quick photo against a black background, where for sound I used a professional camera with lighting and a proper studio. I did this in order to get a good image. I also used Photoshop to take away blemishes, shadows and lighten the image to create a more professional look. I also used the page alignment tool in Photoshop to make sure that all my cell lines start at the same point in order for it to mimic professional practice. In terms of models, on my prelim magazine, I just had to choose somebody out of the class, where on Sound, I decided to choose my model carefully in order to get the right look. I carefully chose the costume and props for my model in order for my magazine to create the right type of look for the genre of audience. In terms of the content of cell lines, for QE Weekly I didn't really choose them that carefully, but for Sound I did. I chose to use certain bands and types of music which my target audience would like in order to entice them into the magazine. For the QE Weekly contents page, you can see I have stuck to a 3-column layout, which is a typical convention of a contents page. However, for Sound, I did kind of stick to this 3-column layout, but I had to adapt it more to my magazine for it to fit the genre of audience. In terms of images, for QE Weekly, we just went outside the class and took some photos, where for Sound, I chose my models carefully and we went into a proper studio with the dark background in order for me to create a professional image. As you can see, the image is better composed in a better line of shot, as well as the costume of the models being better than what it was in QE Weekly. In QE Weekly, you can see there is a lot of space around the text and images. It looks very bare and it's not very filled up. So for Sound, I tried to make sure that I had a good text image to image ratio. I think I have done this because the contents page for Sound doesn't look as bare as it did for QE Weekly, and also it looks very professional. For QE Weekly, I used very simple, generic fonts, which everybody had seen before. For Sound, I made sure I didn't do this by choosing one font to stick to which nobody had seen before. This gives the magazine a fresh new look and entices the reader. In Photoshop, I also played around with the text, adding strokes, changing the colours in order for them to match with the rest of the page. In QE Weekly, as I mentioned before, there is a variety of different text, colours and images. Where for Sound, I tried to make sure this didn't happen, as there is already a lot of text in the contents column, so I wanted it to look very minimalistic to avoid it looking overcrowding. Overall, the look of my Sound magazine has developed a lot in comparison to QE Weekly. This is because I played around a lot with the different hardware and software programs that I would be using for my magazine. I did this in order for me to become more familiar with the different tools I should be using, and I think that this is good as it has created a more professional magazine for the Sound magazine in comparison to QE Weekly. Also, through my research and planning, I did use Photoshop and InDesign quite a lot, so my skills developed through using that. This is why I think that my Sound magazine looks a lot better than QE Weekly.